Ukrainian assets weaponized the environment, trapping a Russian HQ Kelly. A subsequent 24-kilogram strike neutralizes the target from within. Time on target, 0 to 200 hours. 3 precision-guided munitions hug the terrain, flying through river fog to strike dam controls with a deviation of less than 20 centimeters. The initial breach appears negligible. Water levels then surge at 1.9 cubic meters per second, transforming trenches into water traps and dugouts into sealed tombs. Russian infantry execute a chaotic retreat to higher ground. BMP engines ignite as rifles fire blindly into a battle space with visibility under 10 meters. The panic that follows is silent, cold, and wet. As the river methodically claims the low ground, 12 micro-payloads exploit the radar blind spots, navigating inches above the newly flooded terrain. These are not conventional ordnance. They are autonomous, code-driven assets, each deploying a 2-kilogram directed charge. Their objective is not structural demolition. They execute surgical strikes on ventilation and internal pressure systems, causing a command post hardened for artillery to be overcome by water. This is the anatomy of the operation. A river turned into a weapon. A fortress into a watery grave. Over the tree line, the darkness was not calm. It was coiled. It was the held breath before the strike. The time is 02:29 hours, October 25th, 82 kilometers from the border. A 15-ton launch system remained concealed under a canopy of wet pine, its thermal signature masked by nets saturated in ice-cold river mud. For 93 minutes, the crew had compensated for wind shear, humidity drift, and signal scatter. With every variable recalculated and every tolerance refined, the targeting computer produced its final firing solution. Acceptable impact deviation, 19 centimeters. Any wider and the strategic objective of the flood would be compromised. Any wider and a friendly Ukrainian town of 5,700 civilians downstream would be submerged. The crew communicated with hand signals. Words were a liability. Atmospheric sensors registered fog density at 91%. Condensation compromised the optics, while low-hanging clouds obscured any ridgeline beyond 100 meters. Even advanced night vision was failing, washed out in a white bloom. Russia had already eliminated 3 such systems this year with Iskander strikes and Lancet drone attacks. They were also under the constant threat of guided counter-battery fire. To Moscow, the thermal bloom of a launch is a beacon for hunters. Here, one mistake was not the loss of a machine, but a collapsed flank and a drowned village. Precision was not a component of strategy. It was the sole condition for survival. Inside the command cabin, gloved fingers hovered over the fire control panel. Outside, wind moved through the frost-stiffened grass. A lone branch snapped in the darkness, the sound sharp as a distant rifle shot. A timer on the heads-up display counted down the terminal seconds, 5, 4. Beyond their position, enemy radar arrays swept the sky in silent, predictable arcs, searching for threats from above, never conceiving the danger was approaching from below. 3, 2, 1. No final commands, no audible countdown, just a single, deliberate press. The horizon didn't just light up, it tore open. At 0 to 200 hours, 3 streaks launched from the tree line, not as arcs of fire, but as silent spears achieving nearly Mach 3.2 in the pitch-black air. 49 seconds to impact. No sonic boom, no incandescent flare, just ghost-like heat signatures flickering against the saturated cloud layer. Russian sentries detected nothing initially, only the drone of swamp life and the distant churn of the river. Then, a faint vibration began to resonate through the ground. A low-frequency pulse rolled through the wet earth, feeling like an approaching train. Floodlights activated, BMP-3 optics flared to life, and muzzles traversed into a fog so thick it felt solid. They were facing a choking blanket of over 90% humidity, with decomposing leaves forming a 7-centimeter layer along the bank. For one critical moment, comprehension failed. Then, discipline broke. Tracers carved useless red arcs into the vapor. AK fire erupted, blind and frantic. A single RPG hissed into the dark, striking the water 30 meters out, creating a pointless fountain of spray. Their weapons were not failing. their senses were. On a night like this, even a trained operator's vision is degraded to less than 30 feet. Tonight, they were firing into a world they could not perceive. The inbound rockets were indifferent. 02, on approach. They cleared the deck by 8 feet, a blade cutting through swirling mist, untouched by the chaos below. Their flight path a merciless straight line. 30 and 49 seconds on the clock. 3 impacts land crisp, surgical. No fireball, no dramatic detonation. Just a bone-deep shockwave tearing through steel and concrete. A seam splits, a control conduit buckles, and the water begins its silent, cold ascent. At a rate of 1.9 cubic meters per second, it began its crawl across the earth. Not a deluge, not yet. This was a signal. Inside Russian dugouts, the sound of sloshing boots. Radios crackled with static, voices rising in alarm. They scrambled for high ground, funneled exactly where Ukrainian planners had willed them to go. And here, the situation pivots. What happens when panic ignites the battlefield like a flare? Pay attention, because in the next phase, the machines learn to hunt the scent of fear. The question becomes, would you bet a fortress against the fog? The river never roared, it only whispered, and that was far more sinister. At 0200 hours, the water ascended with chilling discipline, not chaos. The flow rate held steady, 1.9 cubic meters per second, bleeding from the fractured valve housing, coating the ground in a cold sheen. In just 40 seconds, trenches dug to stop shrapnel transformed into water-filled basins, brimming with nearly 1.4 meters of rising water. Kevlar vests grew heavy, saturated. Radios drowned in static as lithium batteries fizzed, compromised by the pressure. 80 Russian infantrymen scrambled uphill in waves, their boots finding no purchase on clay turned to thick paste. The acoustics of the battlefield warped. The sharp crack of rifles was gone, replaced by wet footfalls and the clank of metal on metal, all of it muffled by a fog that cut visibility down to 18 meters. The air was thick with the taste of metal. Sensors would later confirm humidity at 92.6%, enough to fog optics and wash out infrared signatures into a gray smear. Across the line, BMP-3 engines coughed to life, each spewing exhaust at 280 degrees Celsius. The thermal signatures were incandescent, painting targets onto the darkness like beacons in a cave. Forward armor plating glistened with condensation. Laser rangefinders blinked uselessly, their beams diffusing in the moisture. The command network was fracturing. A comms relay truck was flooded to its axles in 1 minute, 32 seconds. Its junction modules, rated IP67 for water resistance, were never engineered for a full river surge. They fried. Backup antennas went silent. Water seeped into fiber couplings, insulation swelled. Micro-arcs flickered across compromised circuits and internal breakers tripped, one by one. Then a flash lit the horizon, far from the immediate battle. An Iskander missile, launched from 120 kilometers in the rear, climbed skyward, its heat signature flaring on satellite thermal sensors. The Russian triangulation was too slow. The Ukrainian launcher, its metal still radiating heat above 810 degrees Celsius, had already melted back into the tree line. 95 seconds. From ignition to concealment. Part doctrine, all instinct. When the Iskander impacted, it obliterated a set of coordinates already abandoned, turning Earth to obsidian and marsh reeds to ash. But there was no follow-up. No triumphant signal. No pursuit drones took to the air. Instead, the river simply kept rising. It seeped past rail ties, transforming the stone ballast into thick, unstable sludge, curling around the steel lines feeding the front. A logistical artery was beginning to drown quietly, methodically. The war was no longer being fought over their heads, but under their boots. The fortress wasn't being stormed, it was being submerged. The flood had done its work. Now, panic had teeth. Between 0230 and 0300, Russian command crews reached for situational awareness and found only static. Field relays flickered, drone feeds dissolved into digital snow. Then, a massive surge rolled across the spectrum like a silent avalanche. The electronic warfare attack had begun. A high-power Casor-type array began broadcasting, pushing nearly 700 kilowatts of jamming energy directly through the ground mist and low thermal layers. Frequencies began to bleed into one another. Command channels dissolved. Tactical laptops whited out. Headsets erupted with a sound like superheated steam. 28 separate Ukrainian FPV drones, each barely the size of a pack lid and flying less than 2 meters above the river's surface, lost their signals in the exact same instant. In any other doctrine, that moment signifies mission failure, 28 assets lost. But for these machines, signal loss was the ignition command. Autonomy engaged. The combat algorithm takes control. Servo actuators micro-correct pitch by fractions of a degree. Cameras bleed into low-light acquisition mode. Optical flow grids lock onto the rippling surface patterns. LiDAR arrays fire short-range sweeps at 25,000 scans per second. The machines are no longer listening for human voices. They are processing barometric pressure, exploiting humidity gradients, navigating by the stark geometry of water, fog, and tree line. This is instinct, forged in silicon and code. The adversary identifies a threat, but it's a calculated deception. A Nebo-class radar completes its 6-second sweep, painting 12 elevated returns decoys, deliberately flying high. The system is baited, classifying them as priority inbound. 2 long-range missiles are fired, each worth over $1.6 million, each vaporizing nothing but empty altitude. The real strike force remains cloaked at water level. The drones move like steel insects, tucked into the blind seam where ground clutter and river vapor create a dead zone for radar. Leaves, river vapor, and thermal backwash forge a mask thicker than any armor, a perfect corridor of approach. Above, on the ridge, Panzer crews slew their turrets, adrenaline high, optics sweeping for thermal blooms. Engines idle, their exhaust plumes spiking above 290 degrees Celsius, painting themselves as targets against the cold air. They were prepared to fight shadows in the sky they never expected. The danger crawling underneath their guns, patient, precise, and closing fast. The battle space is now measured in meters and milliseconds. 0 to 35 hours. The first Panzer fire control system snaps to a hard lock. A targeting reticle blooms to life on an operator's screen. The system pins a single low-altitude trace. A lieutenant whispers the command to fire. A 57E6 missile ignites, clearing the tube at 2,300 miles per hour. The seeker cone tears a white scar of vapor across the fog. The drone's reaction is instantaneous, no human reflex, no hesitation. Its onboard logic executes a 42-degree trajectory brake. The entire maneuver takes less than 19 milliseconds, dumping altitude, bleeding speed, then diving back into the river's humidity pocket. Telemetry packets flash across the swarm. Missile vector, bearing, wake turbulence data. The missile detonates on its own confusion. It's a harmless blossom of spray as the proximity fuse detonates over empty water. Seconds later, a Panzer system scores 1 kill a 3-second burst from its autocannon. The burst shreds one drone into a brief flash and falling shards, but their firing angles are a fatal flaw. The turret can only cut one axis at a time. Rotation lag measured in hundreds of milliseconds. A delay long enough for 3 more drones to slip through the opening, like threads through a needle. Across a 180-meter front, the swarm splits its attack vectors. 4 units climb, targeting ventilation intakes. 8 more hug the foundation's contours. Each carries a compact penetrator charge. Barely 2 kilograms, but engineered to exploit narrow channels and structural seams. LiDAR is mapping steel thickness. Airflow metrics are pinpointing. The vents rated for positive pressure against NBC threats, the ideal entry points. At the bunker, external sensors cascade from stable to fault in under 7 seconds. Filter housings vibrate. Thermal dampers flash orange. Then, impact cues. This is not thunder, not a shockwave. It is a synchronized ripple. 8 precise contact points. These charges were not designed to level walls. Their purpose was to pry open the very exhale of the fortress. Inside, lights brown out, circuit breakers trip, air handling systems falter. Overpressure is swelling in spaces never meant to contain it. Below, in the command pit, status screens lock up, map icons stuttering before dissolving into dead grayscale blocks. Above, infantry brace, rifles raised into the fog, blind to the real threat. Below them, the very structure they stand on begins to tremble, not from an outside force, but from a pressure wave born inside its own steel and concrete. The next second will determine if the headquarters endures or buckles from the inside out. There is no outward explosion. It folds into itself as if the Earth exhaled and swallowed it whole. Time of event: 0236 and 10 seconds. The kill vector was pressure, not fire. Pressure struck first. A silent surge tore through steel ribs and ventilation shafts. Dampers buckled, conduits warped. Breakers snap offline. Internal heat spikes at over 30 degrees Celsius per minute. Command screens freeze mid-keystroke. Airflow ceases entirely. A command brain suddenly starved of oxygen. Then the secondary shock arrives, not a massive blast, but a terminal cascading failure. Storage cells went critical. Containment seals began to fail, and propellant stacks ignited under pure structural duress. The ground itself registered the shockwave. In less than 40 seconds, the river clay substrate gave way. Reinforced concrete fractured, steel support frames buckled, and the river breached, flooding cavities never intended for exposure. Above ground, all power failed. Radio channels went dead. Field units awaited orders that would never arrive. Across the operational theater, more than 4,800 troops were now cut off, forced to ration fuel and operate on last known intelligence. Armor was being scuttled in swamped fields and on gridlocked supply routes. Logistical rail lines were completely inundated. Reroute commands were trapped in a dead comms network. It wasn't a spectacular assault. It was a fortress becoming a grave, a command structure eroding with the rising water. The objective was achieved with precision, not overwhelming power. The end of this engagement was not marked by fire, but by an unnerving stillness. By the time the sun hit the water's surface, the fortress had vanished. It wasn't leveled by ordnance. It was wiped from the map by design, by patience, and by a silent rising tide that never fired a shot. The sector's most hardened command post was neutralized, not by explosive force, but by a strategy honed to surgical precision. On a battlefield that once prized heavy armor, silence and meticulous planning became the decisive factors. A dam was turned into an entry point. A river was weaponized. And a bunker built to withstand any assault was reduced to a basin of drowned command. The nature of war didn't change here. It was simply laid bare. The tactical doctrine is clear: precision over brute force, pressure over spectacle, and systems over slogans. Now, place yourself inside that bunker. Would you have recognized the threat before the water rose? Leave your assessment below and subscribe for further analysis of asymmetric warfare, where the engagement may be silent, but the consequences are non-negotiable.